Good evening, everyone. I'm Liz Cohen. I'm Dean of the Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to tonight's show and tell exploration of citizenship, gender, and film. This program kicks off our annual gender conference, which is focused this year on the topic, Who Belongs? Global Citizenship and Gender in the 21st Century. Before we dive in, I'd like to thank all of our speakers for joining us tonight, and again tomorrow. There'll be another crew. I'm also grateful to Rebecca Wasserman, Executive Director of Academic Ventures, Jessica Vicklin, the Director of Radcliffe Events, and their fantastic teams. Thanks as well to Dan Carpenter, who chaired the Faculty Organizing Committee for the conference, and to committee members, Professors Sarah Bleich, Melanie Kamet, Jane Kamensky, Michelle Lamont, and Mark Touchnet. And finally, thanks to all of you for joining us here tonight. Every spring, we organize this conference to address an issue of broad public concern through the lens of gender. In recent years, we have examined topics such as sports, language, violence, and public health, to name just a few. This annual conference is one manifestation of Radcliffe's founding commitment to the study of gender and society, which we trace back to our legacy as the institutional descendant of Radcliffe College. Today, as Harvard's Institute for Advanced Study, Radcliffe provides a vibrant interdisciplinary forum and convenes leading thinkers working at the forefront of all fields. Each year, we open our gender conference with an evening dedicated to the arts. And we do this to fulfill another core commitment, which is the integration of the creative arts with other forms of scholarly inquiry. We begin with the arts because artistic expression compels us to consider challenging issues like citizenship from a unique vantage point. Tonight, we are joined by three talented filmmakers and a distinguished critic who will engage in a discussion about the power of film to shape our understanding of citizenship and gender in important ways. Film portrayals, both fictional and documentary, can bring to life the complexity of citizenship and can show us its relationship to belonging and exclusion. These issues inform our everyday experiences. So what better medium than film to capture and elucidate how individuals navigate this lived reality? Whether films are shown on the big screen of a theater, viewed on a college campus, or watched on a television in our homes, they offer us a unique entry point into how our society understands citizenship and national identity. And films also shape that societal understanding. One infamous example is the 1915 film, The Birth of a Nation, a silent film directed by D.W. Griffith. Premiering under the original title, The Klansman, this film presented a 3-hour dramatization of white supremacist ideology, told through the lives of two intertwined families, one Northern and one Southern, during the Civil War and into Reconstruction. The film romanticized the Ku Klux Klan as a healing force for the South, and it depicted Black people in overtly racist caricatures that became widespread and deeply harmful. The Birth of a Nation also had a profound impact on the nascent film industry, largely because of its immense popularity among white audiences. In reaction to the film in 1915, the Boston branch of the NAACP published a 47-page booklet condemning the film and showing a keen awareness of the threat it posed to Black citizenship. They wrote, and I quote, "We believe this film teaches a propaganda for the purpose of so stirring up the people of the East and the West and the North that they would consent to allowing the Southern program of disenfranchisement, segregation, and lynching of the Negro, and finally to the repeal of the 14th and 15th Amendments." In the 100+ years since that first screening of The Birth of a Nation, mainstream films have continued to reinforce ahistorical storylines and damaging stereotypes, whether intentionally or not. Still today, widely distributed films tend to reflect a narrow white and male experience. According to research out of the University of Southern California's Annenberg School for Communication and Journalism, in the top 100 highest grossing films of 2016, less than a third of all speaking characters were women. That's pretty stunning. Some 70% of all characters were white, even more stunning. And a quarter of these same films featured no Black-speaking characters, while over half lacked Latino-speaking characters. Representation is important both in front of the camera and behind it. I doubt it will surprise anyone in this room that increasing diversity among directors and producers also remains difficult. The people in those roles shape which stories are told, what we learn, and how we collectively think about important issues. Felix Contreras, who is the host of the weekly NPR program Alt Latino, lamented in the run-up to the recent Academy Awards, and I quote, "Very often we have to leave the studios of the Hollywood ecosystem and enter the world of independent film to find the diverse communities that we actually live in." Issues of representation and portrayal in film are closely connected to the question, who belongs, that animates our conference. The litany of challenges is clear, but so too is the potential for storytelling through film to serve as a positive force. I'm delighted that we have such an outstanding group of experts with us tonight to explore these issues and to consider whose stories get told, by whom, and for whom. Gender is our particular concern over the next 24 hours, but I'm sure it will become quite clear that sexual identity is deeply intertwined with race, ethnicity, and class. Claudia Puig, who will moderate tonight's discussion between filmmakers María Agui Carter, Heather Courtney, and Cynthia López. Claudia is a nationally recognized film journalist, the president of the Los Angeles Film Critics Association, and a movie critic for NPR's Film Week. She is also the former lead film critic for USA Today. Claudia will introduce the panelists, and you can read full biographies of everyone in your printed program. Before Claudia and our panel come up to the stage, I just want to give you a quick note about logistics. We'll hear and see presentations from all the panelists, and then Claudia will engage them in conversation as a group. And following that discussion, we will open up the floor to your questions. We'll place a microphone in the center aisle. You're invited to join the conversation, but please identify yourself before you ask your question. I also hope to see many of you again tomorrow morning when the conference continues in this room at 9 a.m. So now please join me in giving a warm welcome to our speakers as they come up to the stage.
Hi, everybody. I'll begin with just a couple remarks, and then we will go through with each of us speaking, and then we'll have a joint conversation, and then we'll open it up to you. I wanted to talk about, just for a moment, about the power of film to broaden us and to educate. How many of you have watched a movie that opened your eyes to something you knew very little about? Raise your hand if you've seen a movie that broadened your knowledge in the past 6 months. Okay, good. People often talk about escaping into films, but films also escape into us. They open our eyes and they help us understand ourselves. They help us understand our fellow human beings. They reveal us to ourselves and reveal the experiences of others. The best films connect us to our shared humanity. Films are all about revelation. They illustrate the human experience in all its glory, messiness, complexity, and fullness. Movies provide a window into the magnificent breadth of who we are, often exploring the lives of people we might otherwise never know. Films can lay bare the deepest emotions and innermost thoughts of others, providing a uniquely revelatory experience. Films work on our hearts and minds on so many levels, engaging and moving us in conscious and subconscious ways. Their images make a powerful impression and stay with us, sometimes throughout our lives. If I were to go around the room and ask you to come up with an iconic image from a film, you'd have no trouble coming up with it. What makes it even better is that what made those deep impressions would probably be different for everybody here. When I immediately thought of like the little girl in the red coat in Schindler's List and all the black and white around her, the chess game between the knight and death in Seventh Seal, Howard Beale screaming, "I'm mad as hell," and I'm not going to take it anymore, which seems appropriate these days. So images on screen seep into our pores, they burrow under our skin, they live on in our minds. Films engage us orally, emotionally, intellectually. The combined effects of cinematography, score, dialogue, sound design, and of course the characters themselves provide lasting images that we often compare to real life. Sometimes real life feels like a movie. The best movies feel like real life. The three filmmakers whose work we are so fortunate to be exploring here tonight offer just that kind of deep revelation. The process of watching their films is almost like excavation. They mine their own experiences and those of others, grappling with adapting to society. Their work digs deeply into the fraught process of emigrating and acclimating to a new environment. Watching films like those of our panelists can help us understand one another. They can help us keep from seeing those who are not like us as the other. They remind us that we are all citizens of the world. And as such, we have more in common with each other than we have differences. By delving into portrayals like the ones we're about to see, we can better understand, empathize with, and ideally help one another in our common global citizenship. And as we recognize our commonalities as human beings, we get a clearer sense of what others experience, the barriers they face, whether literal walls or psychological and cultural obstacles. I was thinking about the word citizenship, and citizenship means so much more than living within certain borders. When we were all in grade school, it meant behaving responsibly. You'd get a citizenship grade. And that pertained to our behavior, our human decency, even as children. So good citizens are human beings who behave well. They care for their brothers and sisters, and they make the world a better place. Films can offer us that portal to being better citizens, more exemplary humans. The best films go beyond the obvious and deepen our understanding, challenge our expectations, and reshape our preconceptions. They illuminate and elucidate, and in the process encourage essential compassion. In the best cases, they can transform us. I'm very grateful to be here in this room as we ask today and tomorrow, who belongs? The answer, as I see it, is we all do. And films powerfully and passionately make our global sense of community abundantly clear. So I'm happy to be hosting this opening panel on citizenship and gender as viewed through the lens of masterful cinematic storytellers. I'm delighted to introduce you to Cynthia López, Heather Courtney, María Agui Carter, and they will each show clips from their impressive body of work. So we'll start with Cynthia.
Hi, good evening. I think I'm going to stand at the podium a couple of minutes. And I'd first like to say that I'm thrilled to be here this evening, to be part of this conversation, citizenship, gender, and film. I'd like to thank you, Dean Lizabeth Cohen, Rebecca Wasserman, and María Agui Carter for inviting me this evening to share some insights and some experiences. During my past 25 years, I've had the privilege to be a library advocate raising money for the nation's poorest libraries. Then I turned and I was executive producer of the award-winning series POV, and most recently I was film commissioner of New York City, where I was the steward of the media and entertainment business industry. To begin, I'd like to share with you a transformational moment in my life and tell you a little bit about myself. I call it Rosary Beads and Sundance. In 2005, it had snowed more than 20 inches, and I had anxiously arrived at the Salt Lake City airport. I was going to New York City. I was making it home. I had just attended the Sundance Film Festival. I had one of those rare moments that you have in your career where you feel accomplished, and I kept on thinking, this is what it feels like to be a star quarterback, running that last stretch right before you have that touchdown. I felt just like that. I had met with all the filmmakers I wanted to meet. I had all the business meetings I wanted to do. I successfully completed, and I actually saw some films at Sundance too. And now, even though I was thoroughly exhausted, I had to get on this flight and get to the Reuters studio at 6 a.m. the next day. I was meeting Gloria Steinem. I had reached out to her and asked her, could she help us promote a film directed by Shala Lynch called Chisholm 72, which was about Shirley Chisholm, the first Black woman to run for president of the United States. My cell phone rang, and it was my colleague, and all I could hear her say, flights are being canceled. I'm very concerned. Maybe you won't be in the studio. Maybe we'll lose the string of interviews that you set up. Before my cell phone died, I heard, Cynthia, I canceled flight, was able to purchase a business class ticket, get to counter immediately. I ran frantically with my carry-ons and my Sundance bags and my heavy snow boots. I was a wreck, an absolute wreck. All of a sudden I thought, how can I go from being that quarterback to totally feeling demoralized and absolutely with nothing left but, oh my God, I have to get on this plane. And all I kept on thinking was, nothing will change and diminish this moment because I will meet Gloria Steinem tomorrow, no matter what. When I was a kid, I went to all these marches. My mother and I, she wanted to teach me, you have to fight for equality. You have to fight for justice. These things won't come to you unless you work. I was looking down in a haze of exhaustion when 2 U.S. patrol officers started walking up and down the aisles. And people were lined up to do the final security checkpoints. And then, as if I was the central character of a Lifetime movie special, I heard, Cynthia López, please step out of line. You are wanted for inspection. Cynthia López, step out of line. You are wanted for inspection. And as I saw the patrol officers walk near, I kept thinking, this can't be happening. This just cannot be happening. I was terrorized, and for a quick second, I said to myself, did I have a jelly donut in my backpack? Did I have extra sugar? Was it my Chinese herbs that somehow look weird to the inspectors? What had I done to engender an inspection? Frantically, I started saying, why are you taking me? I'm an American, I'm a citizen. I was born in this country. Sit down, ma'am. Please be quiet and do not move. Sit here and someone will come and ask you a few questions. I have to get on this flight. Can you please call PBS? Call my superior, call the Sundance Festival. They'll vouch for me. Really, I'm an American. They opened my luggage and took everything out piece by piece by piece. And I have to say, if anyone could have an internal nervous breakdown, I had one that day, for sure. Please call the main office at Sundance, I pleaded. Please. You can even see the program in my luggage. Ma'am, do not get excitable. There's nothing to get excited about. You don't need to get anxious. I was having an outer body experience, and I understood that everything that we had to contend with at the time was the extra security measures. If you remember, I said this was 2005. My stepsister works in the financial industry. Hell, I understand that we all have to deal with extra security. Thankfully, her office was on the 68th floor of the World Trade Center. Thankfully, she was not there that day. But I understand, as an American, we have to take precautions. When I heard the woman inspector say, she looks Syrian, we have to take all precautions, I died inside, and I said, I'm from Brooklyn. I am from Brooklyn. I am an American. As she looked through my luggage, she found rosary beads that I had purchased in Italy, and I had joked with my brother, these will protect my luggage from ever being stolen. The agent then asked, "Are you Catholic?" And for a second I said, "I'm actually Episcopalian now." And then I caught myself and said, "Absolutely, I'm a registered Catholic." "Joe, call Sundance and see if they can vouch for her." My hands were shaking, and I kept thinking, I'm not from another country. But when they asked me where I was from and I said Brooklyn, they didn't really like that. "But where are your parents from?" they said. I snapped back, "Well, my father's from Puerto Rico, and my mother's from Long Island." "Well, your family is from another country." I was terrorized again, but I tried to explain, well, actually, Puerto Rico is a territory of the United States. It's like Guam or the Virgin Islands and a few other islands that the US owns that they usually get from wars that they have, and Puerto Rico specifically came from Spain. And then I caught myself, and I remembered my mother always saying, "Just answer the question." And I became quiet. The male patrol guard came back, and he said, "The Sundance office vouched for her. She's legit." "Ma'am, do you understand why we brought you to the security check? Do you understand, ma'am, why you're here?" And I was shaking because I thought, I didn't bring my passport. I just had my driver's ID. But I always use my driver's ID to travel. "Well, let me explain. You canceled your flight, purchased another ticket, and it was all through a third party in New York. And your luggage is on the other plane. And truth be told, you don't look like you're an American. Plus, our cameras picked up that you look pretty frantic in the lobby. What were you doing? What were you looking for?" And I tried not to engage. I kept my head down, and I just thought, I have to get on the plane. I am meeting Gloria Steinem, I said in my head. I was looking for an outlet to plug my phone. That's what I was doing, I said. "Well, no problem. We'll run you over to the plane." When I ran through the terminal with the two agents and the dogs, they escorted me to my business class ticket. I felt devastated. "Ms. López, on behalf of the US government, we deeply apologize for any inconvenience this may have caused." When they said that, all the other passengers looked at me like, what had I done? And if you know me, I'm a very actually quiet, shy person. "Please have a good day," he said. I nodded, and out of compliance, I just put my head down, and I was shaking. And I finally cried uncontrollably when the airplane doors closed. And all I could think of was lots of people get trapped like this every single day. And I just felt like it wasn't over. And now, every time I go to the airport, my heart flutters until I pass the final security points, because I never want my citizenship or my identity to ever be confused. So I will not take the remaining couple of minutes that I have to give you a Puerto Rican history lesson, but there are a couple of things I do want to say. Puerto Rico was acquired by the United States in 1898. Puerto Ricans are US citizens since the Jones Act in 1917. And the US wanted to ensure that Puerto Rican men participate in all US wars. Puerto Rico is a commonwealth of the United States, which means that Puerto Ricans are US citizens, but we cannot vote for the President of the United States unless you live on the mainland. Currently, the Puerto Rican government, not the Puerto Rican people, owe $72 billion in debt, and the US federal government is currently deciding how that debt should be paid. And due to Hurricane Maria, the Puerto Rican debt crisis, Puerto Ricans on the island are facing the worst humanitarian crisis in its history. 450 Puerto Rican people have left the island over the last year and a half. And recently, I have to say, in doing research for this panel and also for a project I'm working on, I learned that the Harvard student labor movement, along with activists from hedge clippers and others, marched here at Harvard Yard, protesting in support of divestment. because the Harvard endowment, which currently totals $36 billion, has $2 billion invested in a company called Buy Post Investment. And they, in turn, have $911 million invested in Confina in Puerto Rico. As an American, I ask, shouldn't we learn more about how daily decisions impact other US citizens? Shouldn't we think about solar, water, and renewable energies and how that investment could maybe yield long-term and higher results? So I thank you for listening to me and for me sharing rosary beads and Sundance, but I also want to show you a little clip. For 14 years, I was part of an incredible team at POV, Point of View Documentaries, and this shows you a little taste of what some of the most powerful Latino filmmakers are doing today. Thank you very much.
This is going to happen to any institution and any oppressed community that does not respond to the needs of the people.
Part of my role as a documentary filmmaker is to work for human rights. And I feel that my work is not done yet.
In a situation, somebody in the place has got to have the courage to risk everything.
I felt that documentary would be the most immediate way to get to people, to make them understand, to see, and actually feel what was going on.
Workers started coming into the Garment Worker Center with complaints about owed wages, injuries on the job.
I was trying to get very close with the characters, that you could almost smell them.
Un showrunner, todos han luchado, yo también he luchado, no, yo nunca hacía nada. Y ahora llegaba a Ripper y quedaban atadores de toro.
¿Y por qué viniste aquí, a California?
Pues para venir a ver mis nietos, que todavía no hay.
I think a documentary has the unique power to let you experience someone else's life.
I knew something big was gonna happen. I knew I was gonna get some type of awakening.
Me agarran, me meten, me dicen, ¿tú fuiste? Y ya.
In many countries in the world, governments do things that their people wish they didn't do.
Nosotros solamente queremos saber dónde están nuestros hijos, vivos o muertos.
Who are we as Latinos? Do we matter? What's our role as an American?
Both my parents, they came here to work and to better the lives of their children, of us.
What I really wanted to do was capture the sense of humor and the culture behind the economic crisis.
I love making documentaries.
I want to keep making films and telling stories.
The camera illuminates so many things.
On a personal level, this film has changed me.
Without documentaries, if we don't have that, if we can't look at ourselves and see what's going on right now, how do we know what's out there?
We don't need cover-ups. We don't need interference. We need the truth.
Dear Selena, I give you this letter so you would know that lots of people love you.
We're showing the power that we have. We're not a minority, we're the majority.
We are making films. We are talking about our stories. People can now say, I can make a documentary. And they can be a part of my experience, a part of my culture, and a part of me.
Thank you.
Let me introduce you. Sorry about that. This is Heather Courtney, and she is an independent filmmaker, documentary filmmaker. She was a 2014 Guggenheim Fellow and won an Emmy and an Independent Spirit Award for her film Where Soldiers Come From. It was broadcast on the PBS series POV. She is currently co-directing and producing the feature documentary The Unafraid, about undocumented immigrant students in Georgia. Welcome.
Yeah, I have the actual privilege of having worked with Cynthia for
while I was making Where Soldiers Come From, because it was broadcast on POV, and she really is that powerhouse who's running through the airport, and like she's an amazing person. So, and I just want to thank the Radcliffe Institute for inviting me to be on this panel. I think when you first emailed me, I was like, I think I emailed you back, and I was like, are you sure you? What? Am I the person you meant to email? No. But anyway, so here I am. And thank you very much for inviting me to this. I'm going to talk about a couple of documentaries that I made in sort of, not my past life, but a while ago, before Where Soldiers Come From on POV. I made a couple of films about immigration. And I was interested in the topic of immigration for a lot of reasons, but I worked for about 8 years for various NGOs that worked on immigrant and refugee rights, including I worked in the Rwandan refugee camps after the Rwandan genocide. And that was when I decided I needed to be better able to tell a story because of all the stories I had heard there. And that's when I came back and I did a film, I applied to film school. And that's what led me down this path now. So the first documentary I actually made was called Los Trabajadores, and that was my thesis film at the University of Texas. And shortly after that, I made a film called Letters from the Other Side. And they're both films about Mexican migration to the US from Mexico. One is from the male point of view, and Letters from the Other Side is from the woman's point of view. So they're two sides of the immigration story. One is the husbands, the fathers, the sons and brothers who leave their families and communities behind in Mexico to find work in the US to provide for the families they leave behind. And the other side, which was often less talked about, is that of the women and children left behind when their husbands and fathers migrate, and how their lives, their responsibilities, and their roles change. They're all being affected by these forces beyond their control. And it's not just here in the US, it's back home in their home villages. So I want to start with a clip from Los Trabajadores, The Workers. It was my first documentary, as I said, my thesis film at the University of Texas. It came out in 2001, so I apologize for the 4:3 format and the low quality, but that's what it was back then. So, but just to give you a brief background to the clip you're going to see, in Austin, where I was going to grad school, there was a day labor site where immigrant day laborers would wait for work every day. And there was a lot of grumbling from the people in that neighborhood about how they didn't want this day labor site there. They didn't understand or know any of these men, and I thought, well, they had a lot of misperceptions, and maybe one way that I could fight these misperceptions is if I, got to know some of these men and humanized the issue and told a story about them. So that's how I met Ramon, who is the man you're going to see in this clip. I met him at the day labor site. He had come from Mexico. He was the husband to Virginia and the father of 19-year-old Jade and 12-year-old Gema. And this is just a short clip that gives you a sense of him and why he came to the U.S.
Lo que yo hice fue pasar ilegalmente, y eso es en contra de la ley. En contra de la ley de los Estados Unidos. Pero no está en contra de la ley de mi familia, ni está en contra de la ley mía. Ni los mismos americanos me pueden decir, tú no puedes trabajar para mantener a tu familia, no. Ese derecho que yo tengo de que esté bien mi familia no me lo puede quitar nadie. Ese es un derecho que yo me lo obtuve y que yo lo tengo y que es mío. Es mi responsabilidad. Ya mis hijas están grandes y necesitan mucho de mí. pero pues la situación económica no nos los permite y tenemos que hacernos fuertes y ver la realidad de la vida. No se puede comparar la vida de un lugar donde vive uno con su familia a un lugar donde uno vive solo, que si me dieran a escoger, escogería México siempre.
So, I mean, I feel like that clip kind of speaks for itself. I mean, especially when we think about the theme of this conference, citizenship and who belongs. And, you know, for Ramon and for, you know, most of the men like him who have migrated to the U.S. to work, to support their families back in Mexico, you know, it's not really about, they don't consider, you know, crossing the border as doing something illegal. It's like the thing they have to do to provide for their family. Like he says, it's not against the law of me as a husband and me as a father. And I feel like a lot today, I hear this a lot because the current film that I'm working on, which actually I just finished with my co-director, Nancy Prado, is a film called The Unafraid. It's premiering on Saturday. It's about DACA students, actually. And a lot of times you'll hear in the news people say, oh, well, you know, those kids didn't do anything wrong, you know, as if their parents who sacrificed everything, you know, to cross the border and who work 18 hours a day, 2 or 3 different jobs so their kids will have a better life, as if they did something wrong, right? So anyway, sorry, I'm just getting on my soapbox there. but it always really angers me when people insinuate that their parents who have sacrificed everything have done something wrong. Okay, anyway, so what sorry, I just like really got off on a tangent there. Okay, while I was making Los Trabajadores, I went to Mexico and I met Virginia and Ramon's wife Virginia and his 2 daughters, and it was, you know, I wish I could show clips of them, but we don't have enough time. But it was through them that I got the idea for my next film, which is about women and children in Mexico who have been left behind by the men who come to the U.S., because I was really struck by that it was something that I even hadn't thought a lot about until I met his family. And I feel like it wasn't really a story that was talked about that much. So I started to do a lot of research, and you know, I was reading, and this was like 2003-ish, and I was reading a lot about how there's whole villages in Mexico where there's only women and children and old men left. There's no like men or young men left there. So that's when I decided to go down to Mexico, and I met various women through some different programs that work with women in the villages there, and I followed. Well, unlike Ramon, who was sending money home all the time, the women I met there were several of them were forced to be like the breadwinner for their family. And it was for various reasons. I met 2 widows whose husbands died in the biggest immigrant smuggling case at the time. It was the truck that had, I don't know, 100 men or 100 people in the back of it that was stopped in Victoria, Texas. And so I met 2 widows of 2 men who died in that truck. And even though they were just grieving, they still now were forced to think about how they were going to provide for their children. And then I also met a woman named Eugenia, and her situation was much more complex. I mean, her husband went to the U.S., and initially he was sending money back and keeping in touch, but you know, it's very difficult for a lot of people who come here, obviously, and I'm sure you know why. And so he kind of lost his way, started drinking, and went down a bad path and sort of lost touch with his family. And so Eugenia was then kind of had to step up and try and figure out how to provide for her family. So I'm going to show a clip of Eugenia, and just to set up the clip, it's a video letter. That's what the letters from the other side is, which happened organically when I was making the film. I was going back to Texas to visit some friends, And Eugenia said, well, can you visit my son in Arizona and can you show him the videos that you've been making of me? And that's when I realized how messed up it was that I could go visit her son, a complete stranger, and she can't visit her son because she lives in Mexico and she can't cross the border. So it became a part of the film where I would go back and forth with these video letters. So this is one clip I'm going to show. It's actually one scene that I broke into 2 small clips because it's too long to play the whole scene. So we'll just show the first part of the scene and then the second part.
Bueno, pues lo que les diría es que antes que nada, pues que los mandamos muchos saludos a todos, a Héctor Chico y a... Dile, esta es una fotografía de mi mamá.
Esta es una foto de mi mamá.
Que está en un manual.
En un manual.
De productos de nopal y
productos de nopal.
Que le hicieron donde trabaja.
Donde le hicieron donde trabaja.
En el 98, un día regresó una ingeniera y nos dijo que lo que nos podía dar era el nopal. Cuando recibimos el nopal, yo estaba atravesando un problema muy grande. Se me había cerrado el mundo, yo era muy tímida. Entonces, cuando recibimos el apoyo por parte de la presidencia, pues fue como un escape a todos mis problemas. Me dediqué a trabajar y... Pásele, tenemos jabón de nopal, mermelada de nopal y dulces de joconostle.
Que ya no me siento pues tan tímida como antes ahora y me siento muy feliz haciendo todo este trabajo. Y también si por algo tú, Pelón, invitaras a tu papá a ver este video, pues creo que dile que me siento muy satisfecha de haber logrado lo que he logrado sin tener que depender de él. Ustedes, todos mis hijos, son lo mejor que he tenido en la vida y que los quiero muchísimo y reciban un abrazo y que nos vale mucho su ausencia de ustedes.
And then there's just this little second part where they are reacting after they see a video from her husband, and they're reacting to it. He talks about how he wants to come home.
Mejor no lo hubiera visto. Ahora quisieran que regresó, ¿no? Yo sí. ¿Sí? ¿Por qué sí? Pues, porque sí.
Lo malo es que me doy cuenta de que si él un día regresa va a sentirse como con los mismos pantalones.
Mi mamá es Paloma, conmigo no.
Como con mucho derecho sobre nosotros, al menos no sobre mí. Porque no sé si Mari te ha platicado que quiere que se le haga su fiesta de 15 años. Entonces Mari por eso le gustaría que viniera ese día.
Ella tiene muy buenos recuerdos de él. Ella, toda su niñez, o sea, sus primeros años, todos los disfrutó con él. Te digo, él era una persona alegre, siempre jugaba con ellos. Él siempre fue muy cariñoso con ellos. Era más cariñoso él con ellos que yo. Ella sí desea que venga.
So it's very complex, their situation. It's not that like, oh, he's a jerk, he didn't send any money back. It's a very difficult thing that a lot of these families go through. And even if, he had been sending money back, like the women's roles are changing because they're there alone with the kids as well. And so definitely, I wish you could see the whole film because I don't want it to seem like I'm demonizing her husband because he's been through a lot as well, and he left with all good intentions because he wasn't able to survive financially there and support his family there, and he thought he could do that in the U.S. But I'm running out of time, so I just wanted to say one other thing about migration from Mexico has actually changed a lot since I made those two films. Like, it's definitely gone down since the recession of 2008, and even more so in the last year or so because of the current administration, Trump. So anyway, it's changed a lot, and a lot of talking about gender and citizenship, a lot of the people coming to the U.S. now are women and children from Central America, and the women are fleeing domestic violence, or they're fleeing just violence in their countries of Honduras and Guatemala, and I'm sorry, in El Salvador, right? Yeah, and there's a lot of, and I sat with an asylum attorney and listened to some women's stories a couple months ago, and it's really awful what's going on there. And so I know Trump is all about sending National Guard troops to the border now, but I mean, these are women and children fleeing gang violence where they're getting murdered, their daughters are getting raped, and the kids are forced to join gangs, and if they don't join gangs, they'll also get killed. So I just wanted to bring that up. And I have a new film out that I made with my colleague and friend, Aniansi Prado, called The Unafraid. It premieres on Saturday, but you can check it out on Facebook. You can see the trailer. It's called The Unafraid Documentary if you search it. And it's about DACA students and, who belongs. So, yeah, thank you.
And next up we have María Agui Carter. She's a writer, director, and filmmaker, as well as an assistant professor of visual and media arts at Emerson College. She will soon be directing her new script, The Secret Life of La Mariposa, a fable about an undocumented girl, immigrant rights, and the environment, which is based on her own experiences growing up undocumented. Welcome.
Hello. Latinos make up the largest ethnic minority in the US, but have been erased from the American narrative. We're framed as eternal immigrants who just swam across the border and therefore have no right to the American present or the American future. I was drawn to the story of a 19th century Cuban immigrant, Loretta Velázquez, because for over a century, she's been dismissed as a hoax, even though contemporary researchers have found her records in the National Archives and newspapers and personal papers of the time. And I'll share a short 3-minute clip of my film. It's a feature documentary called Rebel.
There is a secret history of this war which exists only in memory. Reader, I will tell you my tale as I lived it. May my words convey what war really is, such that good people will hesitate to solve anything with war again. I wake to the rattle of the tracks and pain shooting through my body. The sick and the wounded surround me. I am in imminent danger of being discovered. I am known as Harry T. Buford, Confederate soldier. But I am not who I appear. If my identity is revealed, I could be tried for treason.
Only one photo of Loretta Hanetta Velasquez has been identified, although it is not certain this is her picture. We really don't know what she looked like. Loretta was not the only woman soldier in the American Civil War, but few left a record of their experience. She published a memoir, The Woman in Battle.
Loretta struggled to prove she was a true American. She was an immigrant, grew up in New Orleans, and when the Civil War broke out, she joined the Confederacy disguised as a man. By the end of the war, records show she had become a Union spy. Her memoir criticized the Confederacy and the corruption of war. I was interested in the complex interplay between the woman, the myth, and really the politics of national memory. In today's America, post-Charlottesville, my film about her has become a political target for its feminist and Latino historical perspective, with one contemporary historian dismissing her as a prostitute, just as her 19th century attackers did. So she continues to be considered by some as a hoax, even though there are so many records about her. Loretta arrived in the US as a 7-year-old, as did I. And in the 19th century, prior to the Civil War, you didn't need permission to come to this country. But in the 20th century, my mother waited years for permission to immigrate, yet could only get US tourist visas. In New York City, on the day they expired, we became criminals. Patrick, would you mind putting up the PowerPoint? My newest film, The Secret Life of La Mariposa, is set in a dystopia where the government hunts the undocumented and climate change has reached a tipping point. It's a theatrical fiction film based on my personal experience, told as a coming-of-age fable about the struggles of an undocumented girl. When my mother was fired from jobs without pay, when the roaches crawled our walls like a horror film scene, we bore it quietly. Complaining to any authority was out of the question. We understood that nobody such as we were not considered human beings with human rights. We were considered illegal aliens. We had no safety net, received no welfare, reflected in the eyes of the dollar shop clerks, of my teachers, of my neighbors. I could see we were nobodies. I learned not to ask for help, not to imagine I deserved any. We hid our status, never spoke up against injustice or those who took advantage of us. Afraid to unleash a hurricane, afraid it might destroy us and the tenuous world we had built up around us. As a child, I internalized we had done something terribly wrong, and I wasn't sure why, but I accepted we didn't belong, that we were criminals. I knew fear, not facts, and there was no one to ask, lest we reveal ourselves. I was 10 when my mother met an American who promised to marry her and sponsor our papers. I was 18 when we became legal residents. It came at a price. You see, being undocumented isn't just about being denied a driver's license or college. Those kinds of obstacles are prohibitive enough. Lack of citizenship often waterfalls into being denied civil and human rights. As an undocumented immigrant mother such as mine, she had to consider what would happen if she reported her citizen husband for molesting her undocumented daughter. What if her husband had deported her instead? What if her daughter was taken away? And if she successfully defended herself and myself against him, how would she take care of her new infant boys if she sent their father to jail? What would become of them when her chronic asthma sent her to emergency rooms and lost her job? My mother was forced to choose between the needs of a teen daughter and 2 infant boys. She chose the boys. Akira Kurosawa, the great film director, once said, "The role of the artist is never to look away." My role as an artist is not to recount, but to find shape and meaning in a way that argument and reason can never do. Here's the story behind my film. After I turned 18, I never lived with her again. I would call once in a blue moon, always drawn to her, my first love, even after her betrayal. Given our troubled past, many subjects were taboo, one of the few safe ones being gardening. And so we would communicate in the language of flowers and plants. She especially liked to tell me about her garden, whether the papaya tree had fruited yet, that her hibiscus was blooming. If I veered into other territory, emotions, politics, my film, she changed the subject. I figured she wasn't really listening, that she didn't care. Now I think she didn't know what to say. She wasn't really educated beyond 6th grade. She spoke English with a thick accent and covered her mouth when she smiled or laughed. She had a chipped front tooth, but also as if any happiness seeping out was unseemly for the likes of her. She was one of those generous Latina women, the kind that fed you and gave you the shirt off her back, the kind that desperately wanted to be a good mother, the kind whose choices in life were never fair, the kind that believed in decency and morality and never, ever cursed. When I had my own daughter, I became even more enraged at her. I would walk through fire to save my daughter. How could she have allowed my stepfather to do what he did? What kind of narcissistic monster was she? I judged her with my good job and my options spread out before me. And so passed 20 years as my children grew and did not know their grandmother. My stepfather left her for another woman. She called me after. She was about to be thrown out of her house in foreclosure, and I took over her payments. After that, we spoke every few months. When the air conditioner broke or the washing machine needed fixing, I would send a check, but I had long ago stopped visiting until I learned she was dying. She had cancer, and they operated on her immediately. I went to see her. Her cancer had been cut out, but dementia had set in. Perhaps the forgetting would finally bring her some peace. She had always taken care of her appearance, and I was shocked by the thin, frail woman with the lined, unadorned face in front of me. She had always made it a point never to be seen in public without her lipstick. I hardly recognized her. She looked at me blankly. "Do you know who I am?" I said. "Sí," she said. "You're my mother." And my hands immediately flew up to my few gray hairs, and I vowed to dye them immediately. And I also remembered that her mother had died very young. I stroked her hand and I nodded. "I'm whoever you want me to be," I thought. "How are you, beloved?" I whispered, and that word just slipped out of me unbidden. I hadn't professed my love for her in decades. My mother tilted her head and thought a minute. On top of everything, at the hospital, she had fallen in the bathroom and broken her femur. "Estoy jodida," she said. In English, that means I'm F-U-C-K'd. Before I left, I laid out one of her favorite dresses, a plum silk and lace and rhinestone dress that she loved. And she was one of those seamstresses who had no buttons or zippers in any of her clothes. Everything was put together with safety pins. And I pulled out a diaphanous scarf and a lovely kind of flirty pair of shoes, just in case I didn't get back in time, I said to my brothers. But I knew I couldn't return. When I got home, I knew it was time. I stayed awake for weeks after that. And I wrote a script about a girl who can hear the songs of the butterflies, who tries to escape her abuse by poisoning herself with their milkweed, but learns to fly instead. These are a few images from my director's notebook. I'm keeping my visual ideas for the film that's coming. We're in development now. I've made many films. Why had I remained silent about my own story for so long? First, I remained silent out of love for my mother and brothers. It was my choice not to denounce my stepfather too, agreeing to my mother's silence so our family could stay together. Later, I was waiting until my children could bear the weight of this story. And finally, I was waiting for my mother to pass so that I wouldn't out her during her lifetime. My mother died just as her favorite crimson hibiscus burst into flower and the hummingbirds arrived to sip their nectar. I cleaned her house out. So many things she had valued, I easily threw away. Her life reduced to 60 black plastic bags melting in the hot asphalt driveway, waiting for Goodwill trucks. On her bureau, my mother had a shrine with many saints and candles and rosaries, and in the center was a broken bust of a Virgin Mary with a nose that had fallen off, and she taped it back on. That was her altar. And in front of the Virgin, a little cheap candy tin. Inside, scraps of paper in Mom's handwriting in Spanish, because she'd never really picked up English very well. Virgencita, ayúdalo a Carlitos que encuentre un buen trabajo. Little Virgin, please help Carlitos get a job. My brother Carlos, over 6 feet tall, is very ill and has not held a job in over a decade. Virgencita, please make Vicente's tumor disappear. My brother Vince has a brain tumor and intestinal obstructions. He's also over 6 feet tall and 150 pounds. I found one prayer for me. Virgencita, help my girl get money for that film about that woman soldier. It's been forever. She'd been listening. A lottery ticket for $1 million had no note attached. I think she expected the Virgin to figure that one out for herself. And one final note, written in very large, shaky letters, perhaps closer to the end of life. Paz al mundo, world peace. She asked nothing for herself, even in her secret prayers. My mother was afraid of breaking her silence, of releasing hurricanes. She quietly scribbled her pleas on paper scraps she did not expect anyone in this world to hear, shutting them tightly in a cheap tin box in front of a broken Virgin Mary. Perhaps when you see my mother, you see a monster. I see a woman who made terrible choices based on options I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy, subject to a broken immigration system that brings people to their knees every day. I've carried the pain of my childhood all my life, but my mother carried that pain too, her pain and mine. If my mother had spoken, if I had spoken, perhaps my stepfather would not have targeted my 2 brothers, his own sons, next. As a child, I believed silence and secrecy were my mantle of safety. As an adult, I am committed to telling the stories of those beautiful souls that have been programmed to believe they were nobodies. History gives our present perspective. In this country, once, there were no visas, no passports, only vast lands that Europeans decided were full of nobodies, there for the taking. US citizenship is a birthright in this country, but too many Americans mistake it for a virtue. The undocumented are criminals, according to our judicial system, and our democracy stands under the rule of law. But let us not mistake law for justice. Remember, slavery once was legal here, and loving a person of the wrong race or gender was illegal. My family's experience was not just our personal failure, it was destined in a broken immigration system. Keeping the system broken benefits the American economy and a social order that privileges some at a steep price for others. In fact, around the world, governments determine human worth according to lines drawn on maps before people are even born. My mother was afraid to unleash a hurricane, but sometimes they're the only thing that will do when we know our systems are rotten. You see, it's true, hurricanes destroy, but they are nature's way of restoring needed ecological balance. They destroy and they also renew, because sometimes you need a new ecosystem. Thank you.
Those were all so powerful. All your words moved us all, I know. They moved me very much. And I wanted to, the through line here is the broken immigration system. And I want to ask you how you make movies about, you make films about the broken immigration system. Do you see those as helpful do you think that those will help transform our problem with this, the way people perceive this issue? And do you have examples of people coming up and speaking to you afterwards about their changed perceptions? And any of you can jump in.
I do have an anecdote from when I made Los Trabajadores. My neighbor at the time I didn't know it, but I found out after. Anyway, she's a very conservative person. We were in a duplex, and she knew I'd been making this film, so she asked to see it. So I gave her a DVD, and I saw her like the next week, and she said, "Oh, I don't think I'll ever look at a day labor again the way I used to." She's like, I just assumed they were, not good people, and your film has shown me, that that's not true. So,
wow.
But whether she went out and talked about it to other people, I don't know. I mean, I feel like on a big grand scale, like that's what you want to do, you want to have it not just be one person, but so.
Yeah, we live in such polarized times, so that's what, I wonder if people, I'm glad to hear stories like that, because I wonder if people just get entrenched in their positions, but I hope not.
Sure. I think I have one example. When I was at PBS, at POV, I always used to say great documentaries take you to a place you've never been, capture you there for a while, and when you come back, you should learn something and feel changed. And there was one film that's called My American Girls, and it is about a Dominican family in Brooklyn. And the parents, the mom works in custodial services in a hospital, and the father also is a janitor. And I cannot tell you how many phone calls we received from people who said, I had no idea how hard Dominicans work to make sure when I walk into that hospital room, when I walk into various public institutions, you never think about who was there before to make that place a special place for you. And I have to say, even myself, who understands Dominican immigration very, very well, I learned a lesson in that film because I have a perception on who's a philanthropist and what that philanthropist looks like and how much money they contribute. And this family, even though probably combined they made $65,000, every year they would send back to the Dominican Republic $5,000, $6,000 to help the local government do certain things and to give back clothing and to give back. And it really taught me a lesson on what local and community philanthropy is all about. And so I do think many of these films, I have to say, Maria is a very close friend, and Heather I've had the pleasure of working with. These filmmakers are our change agents for the future. When we see these films, I can read, and I'm not saying anything negative about the academics in the room, but like I can read volumes about abuse. I can read volumes, even about my own experience. There was a whole series in the New York Times on how people were being mistaken in terms of illegals at airports. But there's nothing like seeing a film, seeing a visual expression of that experience to understand. When I see even just the visual experience that Maria shows of the wings being trapped, it just does something to my spirit, because I think, again, as Americans, we need to do things differently. My parents came to this country because not only did they weren't all about what can I get here, but what can I give? And I think most immigrants in this country want to be part of that experience. And I have to say, when, I know I shared a little bit about my frantic experience at the Salt Lake City airport, but for me, I think I want to make America a better place. I want to contribute, and it shouldn't be at the detriment of other people in other places for us to make this place better. I have to say, and Maria knows this, I just think, Maria knows this. In the fall, I was very distressed. I was very distraught. And, I went to a party, and Gloria Steinem was speaking, and there were many of us that were
She's a theme in your life.
She is. She is. Because there's many, women who they don't falter in their political beliefs. Who they stand up, and no matter how many times they get knocked down. When you think of Maria's mother as an example, that kind of strength, no matter what, is what propelled Maria and her family. And when you think about, I don't know how many of you know, but Maria ended up at Harvard. She's a Harvard graduate. She teaches now at Emerson. Like, some women, and also men, but you have to have an unwavering spirit to survive in these times. And I was at Gloria Steinem's 80th birthday party, fast forward, in November, and I was distraught about what was happening in this country. And she began her toast by saying, look what's happening today. More women have marched in the United States than in the history of the United States. 2, more women are running for public office in the United States than in the history of the United States. So women, don't look so down. We're supposed to be celebrating my birthday. And then she said, third thing, the women of Hollywood are finally speaking out. So if in November you can't see these 3 major accomplishments, regardless to who we have in the White House, women are moving forward. And so I have to hold on to that. And I have to believe, I have to say, I didn't go to your reception, I'm sorry. I'm not a party person. I didn't go to the reception, I didn't go to the green room. I kind of hunker down and I'm quiet. But I was in the courtyard sitting down, and I kept on saying, wow, how lucky am I? I am at Radcliffe. I'm going to speak at Radcliffe. And I'm sitting in the courtyard in the cold. How many women past that courtyard who've done such substantial things? And I'm only a little piece. I'm a little piece of a wing of a butterfly, right? But together, wow, what can we do? So for me, when I think of filmmakers like these, I'm privileged, and I'm very lucky. And thank you so much for having me. And I hope by not going to the party, you'll invite me back.
Have another party.
I think she needs to go to a party.
Yeah, I don't do parties well.
I want to pick up on that. I think one of the issues for me is the fact that media is voice. right? And it is such a public voice. And when you look at the statistics of our lack of having had access to that voice, I'm talking about women, I'm talking about people of color, it is our 21st century communication medium. And the more of us that are able to tell these stories, we can touch hearts in a way that is almost impossible. It's through the art form. It's both a communication, but also a visceral, lived experience. It's a time-based art medium. And I would say, you know, I've become frustrated by documentaries. I'm making a narrative film right now, and part of it is that I also want to reach the person who's already convinced they don't want to hear from me, they don't want to hear from immigrants, yuck, those criminals coming and, you know, ruining our country. And I think about the fact that, you know, if I tell a universal story about a young girl, a fable, it is like Harry Potter. It is like all of these other things that have entered into our culture, and you can learn a little something, hide it in there, but people are coming to the entertainment, right? People are coming for a good story, and then you catch them. And so what I love about documentary is that you can move the needle from people who are ready and willing to listen and perhaps activate. And then what I love about entertainment is all those people that don't want to hear from you, you can talk to them anyway and captivate them and captivate their hearts, right? People used to say, I did a film about jazz music and restrictions against early jazz. It's kind of like how people first thought about hip hop, right? That it was like dangerous. And what happened with jazz music is it grew up right around the time the recording industry and radio grew, and it could enter in homes where those musicians could never enter, right? So you could have an experience. And actually there were things like injunctions against jazz palaces. There was one in Cincinnati. There was a jazz palace next to a YWCA home for pregnant mothers, and they had an injunction for the jazz palace because they felt that music could enter into the fetus and corrupt it, right? But I think that's media today, right? We can enter deeply into your blood, and you can have feelings about people who you would otherwise dismiss or not care about, because you can enter into their shoes and enter into their hearts.
I think someone said that in the POV documentary. They said that films offer the unique power to let you experience someone else's life. Mm-hmm. And I thought that really distilled it really well. Mm-hmm. I also, it made me think about all of you as documentary filmmakers. I was thinking of you, Heather, because you know, your life is very different from that of a day laborer from Mexico. So it lets you as a filmmaker experience someone else's life and sort of dig into their life. And how does that change you in doing that?
Well, yeah, I think before I go into that, I do want to say that I do think documentaries can be entertaining too. Probably not as much as a Harry Potter kind of movie, but I think that like what I try to do, and especially what my co-director Nayani Ansi tried to do with the DACA film, the film about the Dreamers that's coming out in a few days, is to really show their lives as sort of normal teenagers, because they are normal teenagers, and to really sort of show their daily life. And I think that's the key, to get maybe somebody who would not necessarily be like really pro-immigrant to sort of maybe react to this film in a more positive way, is to sort of just see the daily life and not just hammer them over the head with issues and stats and things like that. So it's very much, I think that's kind of key to, I think it's key for a lot of documentaries, if you want to reach people, is to tell a very human story in a verite way. But that said, I do think narratives, obviously, fiction films are a lot more entertaining than documentaries. But, so I'm sorry, change. Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, my life has very changed in many ways from, I mean, I'm still in touch with Juan, well, Ramon's family I'm still in touch with. Juan, who was also in Los Trabajadores, he still lives in Austin with a wife, and they have 2 kids, and his wife actually has permanent residency, and one of his kids has permanent residency, and one of his kids is a citizen, and he still is undocumented, but I'm still very much a part of their life. So I think my life is changed by staying connected with the people that I've met through filming. But I do think it's really important in this day and age, and that there are other voices telling the stories, and not myself as a white person. And I'm so thankful that I collaborated with a Latina on this project, because I feel like it was the film is so much better for that reason. And I feel that she and I bring different perspectives that both inform the story in a way that if we were making it alone hadn't. So, but yeah, I'm very changed. And I'm even very much changed by the film I made about the soldiers who are actually kids from my hometown. Very changed by that. Like, even though I'm from that same town and I grew up in that area and I know all about this little town in northern Michigan, I still am very changed by the people I met through that film. So,
well, and you bring up a really good point. I wanted to ask the 2 Latina filmmakers on this panel. I'm a first-generation American. My parents were born in Mexico. And it bothers me as a film critic to see so few films about the Latino experience, especially living in Los Angeles, where we are such a huge proportion of the population. I'm the lone member of the LA Film Critics who's Latina. I mean, it's awful in this day and age to be the lone anything, especially when we have, the minority is a majority in some places. And I realize we're talking about documentary filmmaking, but I also am concerned about Hollywood, because we see the strides being made by Black Panther and other minority groups, particularly African Americans, but so little being done by Latinos. And even the 3 guys, the 3 amigos that everybody points to, Alfonso Cuarón, Guillermo del Toro, and Alejandro Iñárritu, they don't hire other Latinos. What is going wrong? What is going on among our people?
Do you want to take it? That's a big issue. Obviously that's a big issue, and I don't want to not give it the appropriate time to answer that question. But one of the things both Maria and I have been engaged in, there's an organization that's called the National Association of Latino Independent Producers, NALIP, and it's www.nalip.org. And I was. Oh, okay. Well, I was one of the founding chair people of that organization, and later on, Maria was the chairperson. And the goal of the organization, and it's more than 18, 20 years old at this point. 20 years old, was, and I can't believe it's 20 because it dates me in terms of the group that started it, but our whole goal with starting that organization was to bring community filmmakers and Hollywood filmmakers and public television filmmakers together and have a conversation and share resources so that we knew what we could potentially do together. Now the organization grew from, I want to say 400 members to I don't know how many members there are now, but
10,000.
10,000. So, and it's going strong, but I do think what you're raising is a real critical issue as to who gets hired, why they get hired on certain larger productions. That is something that needs a very specific approach at variety of levels, not just if you want to, not just looking at public television or documentaries, or as in the case of Hollywood, I have to say, when I was commissioner of media and entertainment in New York, on average there's about 150 films that shoot in New York, and I was always looking at the credits to try to find the diverse people who were working. So it is a serious issue that needs attention.
Yeah, I would just add very briefly that if you look at the last 1,000 films that have come out in the sort of top box office in Hollywood, there's been one Latina woman, the woman who did 33, and before that she did Real Women Have Curves, like a decade.
Josephine.
Well, Josefina was the writer. It's Patricia.
Patricia.
And so the problem is particularly an issue. I'm a member of the Writers Guild of America. I'm on their Diversity Alliance. I do a lot of work around trying to bring in more inclusive voices. But unions are unions, right? You have to be working for a signatory in order to get into that union. And in order to work for a signatory, you have to have made a script. You have to have worked for it. So it's this catch-22. And as a Latina woman writer-director, I'm less than 0.02% of the screenwriter-directors in the country. So it's not like there's this huge pipeline. That said, there's a lot more new generation growing up, making digital media. There are incredible opportunities because now we have streaming, we have more programming than ever, and so they're coming. They just haven't been given the green light yet.
And are there greater opportunities, that we were talking about this a little bit before, in documentary filmmaking than there is in sort of the Hollywood system?
I would say not. No, I would say not. I think we have the same problems in terms of documentary. A lot of documentary is grants-based, and we know that foundation dollars, less than, what is it, Cynthia? Maybe 2% of all foundation dollars go to Latinos in every field, okay? So if you think about the fact that documentaries are working in that little space, it's really problematic. So no, I would say it's not any easier. It's equally segregated.
Equally challenging. Switching back a little bit to what you were talking about, both of you were all three of you were talking about very nuanced situations, complex situations. You were talking about a very personal experience that you had to deal with, and you were talking about, Heather, about, women's roles and how people don't look that much at the person who's left behind in the case of immigration. And I'm curious about both of your new films in that regard. I know you were doing The Unafraid, which is about undocumented, and you're doing this very personal film. Well, I guess my first question is for you, Maria, if it's been difficult because you have to deal with this very emotional, all the sort of trauma and the pain of what you personally went through.
It's actually being able to move it. The story that I told you is personal. The film itself is a fictional piece, so I was able to get much more authentic and real and raw because I removed myself and created a fictional set of characters, its scenes, etc. So I think I could get closer to the truth in an odd way with this fictional piece, partly because what I'm expressing is a psychological world and a set of systemic circumstances, not necessarily characters themselves.
Makes sense, yeah.
Yeah, and for me, I didn't mention this before, but I'm developing a project called the Puerto Rico Initiative. And I have to say, if you would have asked me 10 years ago, would I be making a film called the Puerto Rico Initiative, I probably would have said no, because all of my work has been not about Puerto Ricans, but given the current complexities and what people understand about Puerto Rico, I feel like it's very important to do a film about the current debt crisis and the current humanitarian crisis that we face. And so it is very personal, but at the same token, I do think, and for me, it will be a documentary because but it goes back to what Maria was saying. This year, I've been on 8 juries, the Overseas Press Club, various juries, and I'm always astounded when I'm sent via email 600, 200 applications for funding, and there's probably, that made the cut to be seriously considered, and there's probably, if any, maybe one Latino story among them, or one Black or Asian story among them. And in many instances, I hate to say this, but even in terms of women filmmakers, the diversity in terms of women to men. And this, as I said, we are in April, and I've probably been on 7 panels this year. So that a problem exists even on the documentary side, absolutely.
Well, I want to open it up to the audience because I know that there's a microphone there for you to all go to. Please, when you step up to ask your questions, if you could identify yourself and make sure that you are asking a question and not making a comment. Yes, we have our first.
Thank you so much. This was just an amazing panel and so moving, and all of your film clips were just incredible. My question is about a tension between telling immigrant stories that focus on the positive and the wonderful and focus on the dysfunction and the difficulty. And both of those are true, and I often feel like I have to move to one pole, and I'm curious how you manage that tension in your work. Thank you.
Sure. No. In terms of PBS and POV specifically, I used to call it sort of films that were for a PBS audience that tended to be, I want to say 90% an American audience of a certain education, of a certain demographic, and films that were made for an internal conversation within a particular community. And so often what we did to deal with that chasm was hold community events with churches, with universities, with nonprofit organizations, and have the difficult conversations about incest and all the difficult things that happen in these communities, but in more secure settings, if you will. And also always having the facts. I have to say, coming from PBS, I would always, and Heather and Maria can attest to this, I would always want all of the facts about a particular community before analyzing what was actually going on in that specific story. So I think one way to do it is community engagement and being very careful about who sets up those community engagement events, et cetera. I don't know if other people would have, yeah.
I just want to say that as an artist, I'm frustrated by the very few stories that are told about my community, and yet I'm not interested in making plaster saints. I'm only interested in complex characters. If there were enough stories about us, it wouldn't matter if I'm showing a villain or whatever. And I feel that it's my responsibility to get deep and to get complicated. And that's the only way I truly serve my community.
Well, I can say my collaborator on the Unafraid, the new film about the DACA students, that we worked hard to find those kids who were not getting a 4.0 and going to Harvard, because we wanted to tell a story about regular teenagers who aren't necessarily off the charts successful or whatever, because they also deserve a chance as well. So yeah, I agree. It's not all about making everyone a saint, although I love these kids, so. But they're complex too, and it's not a good story unless they are complex, so.
Next question.
Yeah, well, our immigration system is broken, all right, but fortunately our president is setting about repairing it, and the American public supports him in that. The latest Harvard-Harris poll this year shows that 81% of the American public want the border reinforced. 80% want to see lower immigration numbers, including legal immigration. 65% of the population supports his call for an end to chain migration and lottery visas and so forth. So how can we even have a society at all if we don't have the rule of law and everyone in this society respecting that rule of law instead of acting on their own law and believing that they're above the law? This kind of idea that you're your own law, where does that come from?
Okay, sir, what is your question is?
Do you believe in the rule of law, or do you believe that everyone should be their own law, that they should believe in the law of me and act upon the law of me rather than on the laws of the societies that they're in? That's the question.
Yeah.
I don't think we can answer that.
Shush.
Yeah, I think we're going to move on because we have a lot of other people. Yes.
Hi.
Hi.
So, some films and documentaries, documentaries and fiction films as well, can help influence the future as well as act as warnings. For example, a film that comes to the top of my head is Children of Men, which is based in the UK, but has subplots, and it's amazing, personally, I think. What advice would you have for future filmmakers who want to go make a change and make the world better, and who would want to, well, make a difference in the world and try to...
Are you one of those? I hope. Yes. Okay, good for you. Yes.
Well, I would say, for starters, to tell a story in your community and in your neighborhood. You don't have to go across the world to do it. Like, just really get to know the place where you're living and the people there, and tell a story there for starters. If there's an issue you care about that's happening in your neighborhood, the thing that's great now is that you can get cameras pretty easily and software to edit and get out there. And I don't know if you want to do documentaries or narratives, but either way, like telling a story about where you are now and your daily, the people in your community, and I think is a good way to start. So,
Any other advice?
You can make wonderful films on your iPhone. Witness, Tangerine. Many schools are now actually trying to divest themselves from all the fancy buttons and lenses. And I have friends who are professors who teach how to make films on the iPhone so that you think about story, because that comes first, right? Have something to say, and that usually comes from here and from your own experience.
Absolutely. I have to say for myself, my 11-year-old niece has a little pack of girls, the friends, and really good kids, I say pack, that implies something bad. And they came to me one afternoon and they said, we made a movie, and it was with their iPad. And they had actually spent all afternoon recording these incredible local community. They went to the owners of certain local restaurants. They went to old people. They went to this man that was on oxygen, and how did he carry around his oxygen tank all day? And they asked the unaskable questions, and then they wanted to show it to me, but they didn't want my advice. They just wanted me to enjoy the film because this was about the community. So I think if 11-year-old girls can go and figure out who their community is, I think we have a responsibility to sort of, as filmmakers and as people in the future thinking about media, going local, I think, is the way to go.
And we encourage you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
Hi, my name is Abdi. I am one of the students of Michael Sheridan at Community Supported Films. I recently finished a short film called Another World, I think. It's about the social and cultural difference between Somali parent and the American children. A lot like you guys, I'm immigrants, and my goal is to tell stories about immigration. Now, I think, like you guys already mentioned, documentary is to educate the public. In my opinion, is to sort of start that from a young age. So how do we get young people to be interested in watching documentaries? Because mostly, I think, documentaries is mostly targeted to older generation.
Even though we have reality TV.
Yes.
Yeah. So what's your opinion in that, in terms of getting young people to view this? Because I think starting from a young age, teaching people about different cultures, different ethnicities, is the best way to start.
See, I think it does go back to education, and that if young people are in schools where documentaries are shown, again, an example I can give is that my niece's charter school, every time there's a Good Nova program, I make sure to send it to her science teachers, and so that she's aware of what's out there in terms of documentaries. And I do think it starts with the educational system. It also starts with the Boys and Girls Clubs, and there are many nonprofits across the country that are doing really innovative things, training young people to be documentary makers, and also training folks to be critics of media. But I think in people of color communities, we need to see more of her to understand that you can make a living doing this kind of career. So I do think that it exists, but definitely more needs to happen.
Yeah, I think also with the whole online world now, like short documentaries have a real platform. And well, I mean, you can't really make money, but at least you can like get it out there, you know. And I feel like short documentaries, online docs are a thing that like a younger generation is very much about watching and tuning into, either through social media or otherwise.
Don't Netflix and Amazon buy those sometimes too? HBO?
Absolutely, and also remember that we have YouTube, and YouTube is global. And YouTube now, even if you are making, there are ways to monetize this work, and you know, the number of click-throughs, so you can get millions and millions of views, and actually people are making a living. There's a whole world actually of web-lebrities that are actually bigger than the movie stars that we know, that our generation knows. Actually, the biggest stars are now web-lebrities for the younger generations. So they don't even need to be taught by us. We're like way past our prime, and the new generation is already picking it up, you know, and doing it, and they don't need our rules. And that's wonderful, because it also means there's a flourishing of creativity with new languages, right? That you know, the stuff that my kids are on, you know, Snapchat, stuff that disappears, and you know, there's this whole nother world, and every social media platform now has video as well, and every brand has video, and every, you know, so you can do it commercially, you can do it for social justice issues. Everybody needs it, so it's actually a flourishing field.
Thank you. Yes, next question.
One last question. First of all, that was my niece.
Oh.
You have to invest in her film.
Yes. She needs an uncle investment.
She needs an uncle investment.
Awesome. So my question is, how do you get this into curriculums of the schools? Because they need to be talked about on specifics. This is the Catcher in the Rye stuff. This is the Hamlet stuff. This is the stuff that you learn, you know, in grade school, and that's for now, because they did it for then, okay? And it needs to be talked about. There needs to be conversation, because when you go into communities, first of all, my name is Ian, and I was a city manager in very small towns. One was a Hispanic town, one was the Afro-American town, one was a white town. So very interesting experience, but the conversation was little. So, and even amongst the kids. So you have to create a culture where you talk about this stuff, and it needs to be, I think, if there's a way, is there a way to put it within the educational system as a curriculum?
I can speak to that, because Rebel, for instance, is in many curriculums throughout the nation. On PBS Learning Media, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of teachers have been using educational modules that we created, along with teachers who did lesson plans that are integrated with curriculums available for free, and so used extensively. The National Parks and the Department of Interior asked to use Rebel and brought it to places around the country. So it's been seen, and it's begun to enter into that national narrative. And I think that is a fantastic question. I think the sense of how do we enter into the conversation in the first place, right? And you guys both have had that experience as well.
Yeah, I have several of my films are with an educational distribution cooperative called New Day Films. You can just look it up online. And a lot of what we do is target universities, and they're used in university classes. We try to get them into high schools as well, but it's a little bit harder because of curriculum requirements, right, that the state has, or you know. So I think if you're a parent who wants this, or an uncle who wants these, films to be shown in your local schools, you should go to like the PTA meetings and stuff, and say, and kind of demand that be kind of part of the curriculum, because it is a little more tricky in that regard. There's definitely schools that are open to it, and there's definitely films that have had a huge influence, like Bully, for instance, which Lee Hirsch's film about bullying is in every school around the country, I think. So there's definitely examples of it happening, and but I think it starts with like a demand from the parents of the students as well. So.
Well, pbs.org, they have a whole educator section that has lesson plans, clips. I can't remember the last statistic, but they have thousands and thousands of teachers a month get educational materials for free on the site. So it's pbs.org, and it's under 4 educators, excuse me.
And also, there's also community-based screenings that are not necessarily in a school, but like that your local church might have, or a library, or a community center. And if there's anyone here that is interested in showing a documentary about DACA students, we're going to embark on community outreach and engagement over the next 6 to 12 months. So let me know, and we'd love to come to your church or your town, maybe the place where you worked, we can show at the city council or something.
Yep. And I strongly encourage Heather's film, Where Soldiers Come From. It is a portrait, for people who've seen it, it is a portrait about our American boys fighting in the Middle East and where they're from and what they are fighting for. And it is poignant, and it was on POV. Please look up Where Soldiers Come From. And in terms of Maria's film, it is coming. And like every good filmmaker, these filmmakers need investments and contacts. And maybe if you don't want to give cash to that initiative, but you can connect filmmakers to someone who's a critic, to someone in your local community to do a screening. There's always, again, when we think about philanthropy, we cannot just think about the people who have loads of money. My parents didn't have loads of money, but they were so connected. So every time someone had a problem, my mother could figure out who was going to solve that for that person. And it didn't have to do with money. So if we could all just think about, not me, I'm not making something, that's pivotal right now to this conversation, but these 2 ladies are. So we have to support them.
Well, speaking of this conversation, I want to thank you, Cynthia, Heather, and Maria. I can't wait to see your films. And I want to thank you for your artistry, your commitment, your passion, and for taking the time. And thank you here for letting us have this conversation.
And I just want to add my thanks and the thanks of the Radcliffe Institute for what was really a fabulous panel and a great way to start the discussion we're going to have tomorrow. So it's late, but I hope we'll see you back again tomorrow to keep the conversation going. Thanks for coming.